So I want to just talk today, Sunday, the 6th of October. Following on from what we were talking about at Equinox, we talked about balance here and the importance of balance between, male and female, light and dark, etc. As we come into the autumn, we enter the dark time here in the Northern Hemisphere. And I spoke about how the metaphysics of good and evil and the polarization that's taken place in the world, I think, is an epistemological error. I'm speaking as a philosopher, and I quoted Hegel, and I quoted, the breakthrough metaphysical intuition that actually this old story of good versus evil is outmoded. We have to grow out of it. Mankind needs a new enlightenment. If we carry on with that same old story, we're going to blow ourselves up. So what this castle stands for, what the Institute here and indeed even our meditations and prayers stand for, is transcending that ancient outmoded metaphysic which is leading to the violence on the planet. We have to reach a new enlightenment in which dark and light are seen as part of the natural life cycle. Death isn't evil. We went to a lecture in Glasgow for the Scottish Society of Psychical Research this week and heard about out-of-body experiences and how researchers pushing the frontier of knowledge are now discovering that there is another life after death. Scientifically, it can be proved. It's no longer a matter of faith. It's a matter of scientific fact. So that sheds a whole new light on the metaphysics of peace. And as coordinator of philosophers for peace worldwide for some 10, 15 years, I've been arguing that mankind won't find peace until we get this new metaphysic of cyclical wholeness. Now, the reason I support the ancient Druid teachings is because they intuited that. In their spirals that they put at Tara and all their sacred sites, they were putting in stone carvings the metaphysic of wholeness, the spiral. So as we come into the dark time, it's not we're coming into something to be afraid of. It's a time for introspection, for sitting around the fire, for going into the dark of our own imaginations, for calling up our own inner resources, which ultimately is where we find love. As we go into that darkness, we then can come back out again in the spring, refreshed, and it's the sleep and dream time. But in that darkness is when we have our most vivid imaginations. That's our dream time. And as Druids, one pays great attention to one's dreams. I've just been to Athens, to the World Congress of Philosophy, and re-encountered the spirit of Socrates, who I can say is alive and well in Athens. And he was a man who had the courage to face the darkness. He was imprisoned, he was forced to drink poison, he had to die. But he did so with great humour and style, because he knew that the forces of the outer world, the political authorities, have no real power. They live through fear and manipulation and, surveillance, but actually they can't make any mark on somebody who's immune and who's contacted the transcendental supernatural source of being, as Socrates did, and as all the saints do, and as all the people that aspire to any kind of spirituality should be doing. So that's what we celebrate here today. Finding within us the courage to face that darkness and to face down people who live in fear or through manipulating other people's fears. We have to stand for what Christ called perfect love, which casts out fear. And Christ was, if you want, the reason I have so much respect for him, is a great exemplar who should have been terrified. My God, they were going to crucify him. And yet he just laughed and resurrected. We don't know the details, how it was done, who did it. It's a mystery. And I'm prepared to leave that till we have a meeting in some afterlife. I'll ask him exactly how it was done. What I accept is on faith that something miraculous happened, some transcendence, and that symbolizes to me the power of love over fear. Now, where can we find that in today's world? So many people live in fear. Even religious people are afraid of the other religions and peddle a kind of violence against people of other religion. Why should another person's faith, if it's a different colour or has a different flavour, be a threat to my faith? I'm someone who's worked for many years in the interfaith movement and been very fortunate and blessed to meet people from all faith traditions and to learn that each of them has deep wisdom and insight. It doesn't weaken my faith to meet people of great spiritual depth from all traditions. It strengthens it because they're all, as far as I'm concerned, pointing out to common truths that there is a reality that transcends this plane of being, that it somehow cares for, nurtures, has love for this realm, and cares for each one of us individually, and that we all weave certain patterns of karma that we're responsible for, ultimately. So it seems to me that true interfaith work is the alternative to fanaticism. I call that monofaith fanaticism. The planet's facing, crossroads. We can either have interfaith peace, or we can have monofaith fanaticism. I've just been reading an interview conducted this week with one of the Taliban leaders in Afghanistan, fighting behind the scenes, and they're looking forward to the Taliban regaining power in Afghanistan. They have Mullah Omar in the wings, who is going to then reimpose a very strict pseudo-orthodox Islam on that beautiful country, in which women again will be restricted from education, and punishments will again become draconian and so on. And in the summer I met a policeman who's been serving in Kabul from Croatia with the European police force, and he was talking about the complete lack of educational dialogue going on, and that the problem in Afghanistan is fundamentally one of education. They're being indoctrinated with a very, very narrow band of what is authentic Islam in their views. And I think the challenge therefore is on the world's educational systems. Why isn't UNESCO, why isn't the British Ministry of Education, why isn't the other education authorities, including in Saudi Arabia and Iran and other ancient Islamic nations, working to bring these people out of that medieval darkness, really? I have enormous respect for my Muslim friends and colleagues over the years, and I've met enough to realise that there's a tremendous enlightenment buried inside Islam. They've had some of the greatest philosophers of history, and the universities of the West wouldn't have been refounded, Paris and Oxford, without the Islamic texts of Aristotle that were then translated in the medieval period. We have tremendous debt intellectually to the Islamic world. What we should be doing, therefore, is building a global civilization based on valuing each other's texts, which is why in this castle we celebrate all the faiths, and why I've created this periodic table of the world's religious and philosophical traditions. Again, that should be studied. And the other thing I've created is this calendar of saints and sages, a universal calendar, each day of the year. There's one from each of the 13 great lineages and traditions of mankind. So today in the castle, we celebrate for Christianity an amazing Venetian Catholic theologian called Reverend Paolo Sarpi, 1552 to 1623, who wrote the history of the Council of Trent, which was when the Roman Catholic faith kind of consolidated its belief systems in the face of Protestant challenges. But Sarpi was a very interesting man because he was representing Venice, which was Catholic, but also didn't tolerate Roman Curia papal interference. There's a difference between being a Catholic and being a papist, being someone that believes in the absolute authority of the Roman, Inquisition. And in fact, his works were much loved by Jacobean England. The Anglican tradition admired his work as a historian. So, and Venice was a great centre for intellectual work for many generations. So we honour his work today. We honour the work of Giuseppe Tucci, one of the greatest Buddhist scholars of the 20th century, an Italian who translated Buddhist texts. He travelled in Tibet. I've got his books on Tibetan Buddhism. We celebrate the Hindu Srihastra, who compiled a tantric lexicon in the 12th century of Sanskrit and other languages. We celebrate Quasimodo, the great writer, 1901 to 1968, a poet and dramatist. We celebrate for pagans Xenophon, who was a disciple of Socrates. We celebrate for Islam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, 780 to 855, who was a jurist and one of the greatest legal scholars of Islam. He founded the Hanbali school of Islamic jurisprudence, and he compiled a hadith, the Musnad, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. And yet he was accused of heresy in his day by the Caliph Al-Mamun and his successors, who tried to challenge him. Now, Ibn Hanbal also studied with one of the great Shia saints, who was, I think, one of the imams of the chain of Shia imams, Jafar as-Sadiq, who was teaching at that time. So Ibn Hanbal, at that level, it makes no difference whether you're a Shia or a Sunni. If you're a learned person, you have respect for all paths. We celebrate also a Jewish anthropologist who specialized in Japanese and American Indian traditions, known as Mishya Tityev. There's a Chinese, a Sikh, and also Lawrence van der Post, who was a Jungian explorer of South African religions and influenced Prince Charles. We also celebrate Leopold Mozart, the father of Wolfgang Amadeus, who was a great teacher, and whose house I went to in Salzburg last year. And finally, a Finnish woman, Armi Ratia. So this is just a tiny sample, like a cross-section each day here in the castle, of the great people who've been on this planet in former times. And really what I'm saying by honouring them each day is, let's not blow this world up. Let's not ruin this planet. Let's keep it safe for future generations. Because, the collective work of all these great scholars and sages over the millennia, we're just like passing that torch on. And our lives are so brief and short. And yet I think it's very important that we each weigh up our actions. What are we doing? In whose book will we figure 100, 200, 300 years from now? Who will remember us and our deeds? So let each one of us strive to be at least some kind of a little footnote in this calendar of universal saints and sages, and try and make a stand for that Socratic courage that has the courage to stand up against, I think, fear. I don't think people like the Taliban and other extremists, I don't think they're bad people. They are just very afraid. They're afraid of the West. They're afraid of, whatever. And so we have to perfect our love, make it big and strong enough so that they can come in from the cold. That's how I see it. And, philosophy is strong and big enough to provide that energy for people, if only we can actualize it and draw on it. So there's a few thoughts I wanted to share this day. Thank you.